Hi everyone. Today I wanted to show you guys how to make this dashboard. And by the time we're done, not only this dashboard, but any one that you want to make yourself. Now, the way to start out with any dashboard is to have one main data set. For me, that's going to be my main playlist. And even though I have two other data sets, they're going to just feed into that main data set. From there, you have to make a pivot table for each chart that you want. I prefer them on separate tabs, and then have them all lead into the final dashboard. So starting with the data, I know a lot of you guys aren't wanting to hear this, but a lot of it was manual. So let's start with the stuff that wasn't manual. So the first thing I did is I went to tunemymusic.com. This is so I can convert my Spotify playlist to Excel sheets. And I ended up doing this for a number of playlists, the main one being my liked songs, because that's all of them. So go to your Spotify, go to your liked songs, copy the playlist, and then you should be on your way. I also did this for my liked best of 2016, 17, and 18, which is a Spotify playlist that they put together for you. And I also did this for my favorites that I marked. This was to give a better idea of what and to compare in the data set. Finally, go to the export to file, CSV, and select. And then you would click start moving my music. I already got the file that they give you, so I'll just go over that now. So what it ends up giving you is this, and it gives you a few more columns, but I got rid of them because they're not very useful. The main ones are the tracking name, the artist name, and the ISRC code. And the ISRC code might seem like kind of just a jumble of letters and numbers, but it's actually kind of important because the first two is where it was made, and then about 5 or 6 in is when it was made. So I just did a left equation to figure out the first two, and then a mid equation to figure out about 5 or 6 in where it's the numbers right after the last letter. So once you get those first two letters, you need to go to ISRC/wiki ISO country codes. And so the very first one that pops up is this, and it's going to give you a list of all of the different codes and where they mean. So I just copied all of that, put it into Excel, and then did a VLOOKUP to figure out exactly where they're from. So going back to our data, you were given the artist name and the band location by the Excel file we just looked at, but a lot of the other stuff you weren't. So you can pretty easily figure out the monthly listeners by going to Spotify and figuring that out, but the rest of it's kind of subjective. So male, band or singer, those are things I just kind of listened to and then went, oh yeah, it's a male or it's a band or just a solo singer. And then the more difficult, time-consuming one was I typed the artist name into Google and it gave me a bunch of subgenres. I used my best guess to figure out, well, how much of each of those subgenres is that band, and then I put it in. The important part for me was I wanted it all add up to 1 per artist, so that when we went to the main dashboard, all of these subgenres will add up and line up with each other. So once you have the subgenres, all I did for the main genres was I had an equation that said, well, sum of all of the subgenres of rock, and then press enter, and it will always equal 1 on all of these, just like it does for the subgenres. But this time I'll at least be able to filter it down a little bit more so that if I want to just look at the genre, I can, or if I just want to look at the subgenre, I can. Going to the song info, we were given the song, the band, and the song year. But what we weren't given is the mood, the energy, the length, song popularity, or again any of the genre, subgenre stuff. So I pulled actually over the subgenre and genre stuff from the band because I didn't think that that would differ too much between songs and because that would take way too long. But I also did subjectively give them a score of 1 to 100 for mood and energy, and then I figured out the length and the song popularity by Spotify. And you can figure out when you added it by doing the Spotify on your desktop. It won't show it to you on the web, but it will on your desktop. And the reason I did the mood from 0 to 100 rather than just say 5 different categories of chill, sad, happy is just because I thought it looked better to have something like this where it's a dot chart that has where you can see the trend and whatnot than it did to have 5 different categories and then just varying amounts of dots. A little subjective, but that's what I thought looked better. Finally, once I had those two, I pulled it all into my main playlist. And so this is the playlist that I'm going to base all of my pivot charts on and eventually my dashboard. So a lot of the stuff is the same. So it's the mood, the artist, the band, the genre, so on. This is where I added the top songs of 2016, 17, and 18. And what I did is they gave me 100 of my favorite songs for each of those years. And so I just gave it a score from my top one got 100 points, my next one got 99, and so on. And I put those values in accordingly. And then I put a total score where I added up all three. I could have done it where, the last year got more weight or something, but I just decided to give it all three relative weights. Now I'm going to get into each of the pivot charts that I made. So the first one I did is the gender of the artist, so the singer rather. So I'll start by just making a pivot table just for anyone that doesn't know. So you would go to Insert, Pivot Table, and then, I want that data on a new worksheet. And then something that I like to do is I like to go to Pivot Table Options, Display, and then go to Classic Mode. This just means that when I drag it over, when I click it, I can drag it over. So I can just click on gender, drag it to the rows, and there it is. And then I can do track name, because that's going to be every single song, drag that over, and then voila, you get your total results. So from here, the way that you make the donut chart is you go to Insert on the pivot table, and you go to the pie charts, but you go all the way down to donut chart and click OK. Now I hid everything else. And from here, if you click it once, it's going to select all of it, but if you click it twice, it's going to select the single one that you selected. Then right click and go to Format Data Points, Fill, and then I went with Gradient so that it gives it kind of that style. And let's make this one a bit darker. And that's pretty much what I did for all three of those. So the next pivot table I made was the year the song was made. So same thing as before, just make the pivot table, and then I put the year the song was made, and then the song title so that it shows all of them. From there, I went in and I added a line chart, as you see here. The way I got this glow effect is that when you go to the formatting, you can go to Format, and then you can say, I want this to have a white color, which it does, which at first is going to make it look invisible. But then you go to Shape Effects, Glow, and then pick the glow that you want. So if we wanted to, we could make it purple, blue, whatever, pick your own color. Doesn't really matter. But that's why on the main dashboard, it looks kind of neon. I put the glow pretty low on this one, but if you want to, you can make it more. But either way. And then to change, I typically find the less information is the better. So if you go into the Format axis, and then go to the label, you can specify the interval units. So if it's going from 1967, 1920, you can basically just show 1 or 2 rather than cluttering your bottom line. Same thing with the y-axis. So the next one I did is the top 10 songs. So create a pivot chart like you did before with the track name and then the genre to the side. And then unfortunately you can't get the chart you're looking for, this being by doing a pivot table or a chart. So if I went to bar, recommended charts, and then I said bar, it would give me this nonsense. And you can't flip the rows. So if I went and did the same thing, you would get a much better result. Now the next one we're going to go to is the top bands. And it's very similar except for there's a catch. Sometimes the bands have a few songs that are also on your top list, and that's going to lead to blank rows, which isn't very good. So what I did is I made another pivot table, and I just did the top bands, and then from there, you can do what you did before with the VLOOKUP, except for referencing the first pivot table. And that will give you a similar chart to what we had before. So the next one we're going to do is the map, which isn't actually that complicated, But the only catch being that you're going to need Excel 2019 for it, and that you're going to need to paste the values outside of the pivot table itself. So once we go into here, we just do an equation that pulls this, unless it's blank or grand total or something like that, and we're going to be bringing that up much more often. So the map is based on this rather than the pivot table, but it pulls that just fine, and if you filter the pivot table, so like I did here, then it's going to narrow it down and it will affect it just like we want it to. So the next one we're going to do is the energy and the mood. So I made a pivot table and I did it by energy and then by song mood next. If you're getting blank rows here, all you have to do is go to design and then report layout and then repeat all labels or all item labels. This is going to repeat it all the way down so that you get a better looking and more functional pivot table. And then what I also did is I did it by song title for the total. That way that if you want to, you can make each one a little bigger, like this one right there, if there are multiple instances of me giving it a 521 like I have right here. So let's see, if I scroll down, there aren't many, but I gave 2 a score of 52 and 56, so that one is going to appear a little bit bigger on this map. So next up we have band popularity, and we were already given band popularity by Spotify, but we need to narrow it down, quantify it so we can put it into a chart. So what I did was pretty subjective, so you can change it how you like, but I made it hipster, normal, popular, and very popular, and then what I did is I said, well, if it's below 500,000, then I'm saying it's pretty hipster for Spotify. If it's between 500,000 and 2 million, it's normal. 2 million and 200 million, it's popular, and above 200 million, it's very popular. Then from there, I totaled all of those up with a sum, found the grand total, and then figured out my percentages based on that. Just like before, we'll make a donut chart, except for this time we're going to make the outside of it no fill, so that we only look at the part that's the 18%. And I know what you're saying, well, I have one donut, but I want 4 donuts. And I mean, I say that every day. So let's make another. And then just cut it and paste it in. And then you do that for all 4 and you get what I have on my dashboard. So next up is creating the song length. So once you put the song length in and the track name just as your pivot tables, I go over and do a quartile function. So you do that for the entire song length, and then do 0, and then for each one of these it's 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively. I would do the difference, which is just one minus the other, and then I change those from a format of time into general. From there, you take the song difference length and you go to more, bar, and then go to this one right here, which is under stacked bar, and it's the second one. From there, you would say no fill for those two as well as this one. And then from here, you click on one of these no filled ones, you go to design, add chart element, go to error bars, and then click more error bar options. From there, we're going to go to this right here and say I want minus. And let's do a percentage. I want to say 100%. And then do the same with this one. and there you go. The only thing I did from here is I went and I said no fill, but I want a solid line. Same thing, no fill, but solid line. And I did the same formatting as I did before with the white and the glow. Oh, I also said I do not want caps, because this one doesn't have a cap, so I might as well not have this one as well. So next on the list is the genres. So I made a pivot chart of when added, and I added the genres on top, and then the number of songs, or the sum of them on below. And then I made a line chart. I eventually changed this to an area chart, but for the purposes, we'll go over this line chart. So if you want to make it smooth, all you have to do is click on it, right click, go to Format Data Points, and we already have it over here. And then at the very bottom, it's Smooth Lines, and you click that. To get the color charts of all of them, all you have to go is to Page Layout, and then go to the colors. And then from here, you have a bunch of different options. You can change it however you want. And then this will give it the theme for your entire spreadsheet. So I chose Violet 2 just to go with the background that I currently had. If you want to change it from there, you can still go to Format, or Design, and go to the Change Colors. And then it gives you a bunch of the different types of that Violet 2. So you can change it up from there. So if you were on the purple one and you're like, well, that doesn't really differentiate anything, then you can go back to the very first one. Finally, we have subgenre. So I did the same thing I did before. So just add a subgenre and then the total on the side. This time, what I did is that for whatever reason, whenever I filtered this, it just put the numbers and then the rest were blank, and that kind of made it so that it was a jumbled mess. And so what I did is I put it off to the side in the middle. I did just a mid equation so that it wasn't sum of. And I didn't have to change all of them in the pivot table. And then a VLOOKUP to figure out the sum. And then what I did is I added the genre so that later on we can filter it down a little bit more. And then finally I did a pivot table of this data. This is the only pivot table that isn't referencing the main data source, which means that it's the only pivot table that will not change when I click on one of these. And what that means is that when I click on the subgenre, it's a jumbled mess right now, which is why I hide it until I click on one of these sidebars. So if I wanted rock, I'd click on this, and then I'd click on this. But I'll get into that in a little bit. Finally, for the subgenre radar chart. So we go into our second pivot table and insert a radar chart. And I went with the filled in one. And again, this looks like a jumbled mess, but just like from the main sheet, if we narrow it down, then it's going to look much better. So that's why I actually hid it on the main sheet right here, and then made a macro so that once you click on the subgenre, it'll bring it up. So you click on one of these buttons before you click on it so it doesn't look like a jumbled mess until you do that. So now it's perfect because this one is selected. But if I had unfiltered it when I left it there, it would look like we have it over here. So I'll get into the macro in a little bit. So now that you've got all of your pivot charts made and you're putting them all into one dashboard, now you just need to format them a little bit, add the slicers, and add the macro. So the first thing is the formatting. So the way that I added this for all of these, it has kind of a little bit of a glow, just like I did before with the line chart. You go to formatting, except for this time, instead of going over here for the shape outline, you go over here and you say, well, I want it to be white background and I want it to be text of glow. And then again, it gives you all the glow options. And I went with the pink one just to give the same theme that I had for going around. Now, I made the decision also that I would get rid of the legends on these and these because I have a legend down here which I just put right off to the side and I put it down below. And I just made sure that the colors of this one lined up with this one as well, so that if it says pop is dark magenta or whatever that is, then pop is going to be dark magenta over here as well. Now for the next part, which is probably one of the most important parts, is adding the slicers. So if I wanted to add a slicer to this one and to all of these that affect it all at once, I would click on the table and then go to Insert and click on Slicer. From there you can pick what you want to have a filter. So right here I have favorites, I also have genre, and those are the two main ones that I have. So if I wanted to do genre right here, I'd click OK, and then it'd give me this. Now, it's not quite the way I want it to look, so I have one right here, which I made right here, but let's say that I wanted to see what that was. So let's modify it. So you just do the same thing I did. You go to the whole slicer, header, you just format it the way you want each individual section, and you get to see a little preview on the side. And so the way to get to that is to click on New Slicer Style. Now I already have it, so I can just have it the way I did before. Now the main thing you want to do is you want to right click it and then go to Connection Reports. Now I have all of these selected already because that's the way that this slicer is set up. But for you, these are going to be blank. So you would go in and click each individual one, and so that once you click on one of these, it's going to affect all of them. So other than a slicer, I believe this is only 2019, but forgive me if I'm wrong, you can go in and do a timeline. So you say when song added, which is what I did, and then you can stretch it across. And then once you filter it down by date and put it in the same style that we had before, which we can still get by getting the new timeline style, you have to do the same thing as before, which is the report connections, and then just go in and click every single box. Now this only works, of course, if it's all connected to one data source, which is why I was stressing in the very beginning to have it all under one data source. Even if you have multiple data sources feeding that one data source, it all has to come from one data source, every single one of these pivot charts and tables. So once you do that, it'll affect every single one by clicking it. Same thing with this slicer. Now for the final part, which is two macros. And I know that a lot of people are a little bit intimidated by macros, but this is really easy because all you have to do is a recording macro. So the way that I have this set up is I have one chart here, and then I have this box that I shaped as my background, but if I change the color, you'll see that it's just a box, and it's just separating these two. If you put it in between the two and like bring it forward and backwards until only one of your charts is showing, and then just format it as the same as the background, then it's going to look perfect with one showing. From there, all you have to do is go to Developer, go to Record Macro, and then it's going to say, what's your name? So give it a little name. I'm going to say Test right now, and then say OK. And then from here on out, whatever you do, Excel is going to remember it. And then when you press Stop, then it's going to have a macro in mind so that whenever you do something, it'll remember that sequence of events. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this chart, and I'm going to send it backwards twice. So it's once is hidden with that shape in front of it, and 2 times is behind the other chart as well. And then I'm going to bring the shape back one as well. And that's going to put the second chart in front. And then whenever you're done, just, put your cursor off to the side, go to Developer, and then stop recording. So now you have a macro. So from here you can insert an object. So what I have here is I made a button. And my button here is a little bit prettier in terms of the format, but we're just going to say test for this one right here, and then assume that we can format it later. So once we have our shape, we right click it and say assign macro. I'm going to assign it test and then click OK. And then I already have this macro right here, so I'm going to put it back to normal. But once I click test, it does everything I just did. It remembers it. So what I did after that is I just made 2 macros and I put the second one in front of the other. So I put it right there. Well, that messed up, but you get the point, where I overlaid it so that this one right here does what I just showed you, and then I put one right there and just titled it energy and mood, and then did the reverse so that it puts the other one in front. And now we're done. Now you should be able to make not only this infographic, but any infographic that you want. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that gave me kudos on this. I think it turned out well, and I appreciate it, and you guys obviously appreciate some of the hard work that went into this. If you guys like this stuff, I'm going to be posting future content, not only Excel, but things like infographics, PowerPoint, etc. And I'm trying to use things that are free or at least very cheap and things that people have all the time, like Excel, whatnot. So if you like that sort of stuff, definitely subscribe and follow me, share it if you can. And not only that, but I'm just setting up a Patreon. So if not only do you want to know how to do all this, but you want some of the sheets themselves, I'm still trying to figure that out. So give me a little bit of patience, but sign up on Patreon, give me a few dollars, and then I will send it your way. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope to see you next time.